Members of the club to honor our veterans with a song. And as I'm getting ready, but before I do that, I have to tell you a story about something that happened in the last few weeks. Of the 25 years of my public service, I've been involved with a lot of projects, but none has meant more to my heart than the World War II memorial that we dedicated last December on Pearl Harbor Day there at the Capitol. And it could not have been done without this club. And I was very pleased to have the level of support from Phoenix Rotary 100. Many of you were there that day, and as you may recall, I honored different groups of our veterans, of which there were thousands of veterans in the audience. And we ended up with the World War II veterans, and then the Pearl Harbor survivors, and then I was planning on ending with the two survivors of the battleship USS Arizona, which we knew were present. Well, before the event started, I went to meet the two of them, which I was told were sitting in the front row. And as I went to the front row to introduce myself and get to know them, I kind of announced I was Secretary Bennett and who were the survivors from the battleship Arizona. 3 men raised their hand. And the first gentleman I went to told me his name, and I knew his name was not on the list of the 9 still surviving sailors from the USS Arizona. I didn't know what to do for sure. Maybe we had an imposter in our midst. But I introduced myself to him, and he told me his name was Vito Colonna. I went over to the other 2 who introduced themselves to me, and their names matched 2 of the 9 that we had in the program. And their stories are unbelievable. The 2 of them actually went hand over hand on a rope that was thrown over from sailors on the USS Vestal next to the Arizona and escaped. One of them having been burned already on 80% of his body. That was Don Stratton, and the other on 50% of his body. So I knew that we really had 2 heroes in our midst. And yet they also said, "Who's this other guy?" I said, "Well," he stood and introduced himself as a survivor from the Arizona. He said, I think his name is Vito Colonna. I've never heard of him. Well, we went on with the program, and when we got to the point of announcing the survivors from the battleship Arizona, the 3 men stood, and there was a rousing applause. And then they sat back down, and for the last several months, I've wondered if we had honored one who was maybe pretending. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke at an event that was organized by a project started here in Shadow Mountain High School by a school teacher by the name of Barbara Hatch called the Veterans Heritage Project, and it matches high school writers with veterans, and then those high school kids that want to be journalists or writers get to write the story down of these veterans, and then it goes into a hardbound book. And for speaking at their luncheon, they gave me a book, and I'm going through it a couple days later, and I happened on to page 53 where I find the story of Vito Colonna. And so I'm reading through it, and I want to just share a couple of paragraphs with you. Vito was trained in the Marines as a corpsman, medical corpsman. His specialty was amputation, but he didn't like doing amputations, but he ended up being a corpsman. Listen to this story. Training complete. Vito's orders were to join the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor. That is what his dog tags listed, and on a small rubber craft taking him to his ship early in the morning of December 7th, 1941, the first Japanese plane hit. Quote, "When the first plane hit, the concussion wave knocked us all into the air," he recalls. "When the second bomb hit the Arizona midship, igniting the ammunition depot, quote, it was enough to put a hole in the earth," Vito commented. The hit injured Vito's back so severely he was unable to walk for months after the attack. Thrown into the waves amidst the horror of the attack, Vito began to fight for his life. As bombs exploded around him and planes veered overhead, Vito struggled to swim back to the shoreline, at least the length of a football field away. He was weighed down by flaming oil in the water. He dove under the water to swim forward and then came up for air. Quote, all of my hair was burned off. As he wiped his hands across his face, he pointed out that his eyebrows and mustache were also gone. The harrowing struggle for survival ended as he reached the Hawaiian shore and immediately collapsed. He awoke in a military hospital 2 days later. He does not know what happened to the other 15 men in the raft. After undergoing rehabilitation for his injuries, Vito was deployed to the Pacific Islands. His training as a corpsman, however, could not prepare him for the horror of the battlefield in the South Pacific. Quote, I was in the 1st Marine Division, Vito explains. We were the 2nd wave coming onto the beach at Iwo Jima. The Marines would storm the beach in 3 waves. The first wave resulted in the most death, bodies strewn all across the sand. The 2nd wave came in to, quote unquote, sweep up, as Vito tells it. But the 3rd wave really goes to town, he says. Here in the thick of combat, Vito would try to use what he was taught. He had little time to think. Coming up the beach, he heard a shout. Corpsman, corpsman. Vito found a fallen brother with a cut from his throat to his belly. I said, quote, God, I don't know if I can help him. And I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. He looked around him, making as he regularly had to the hardest decision one can make. Does he help this fallen soldier who may be beyond help? Or does he help men whose injuries are less severe? The injured man saw Vito's flash of indecision and grabbed him by the dog tags and pulled him down. And I'll read the language literally. You help me, goddammit, he said. And so Vito set to work. He had no time for gloves. He tied off the arteries to lessen the bleeding and did his best to put the man's intestines back in his body. With only rudimentary tools, he used fishhooks to make rough stitches up the man's torso, and then called in aides to carry the man to a field hospital. Quote, I didn't know if he would make it, Vito recalls. 20 years later, Vito was at a mall with his wife. When a man and his wife and a young daughter walked past, the man stopped and hollered, hey, Doc. Vito looked, bewildered, and the man simply lifted his shirt. And there he saw every stitch. There I saw every stitch I had put into him. It goes on to talk about serving on the island of Peleliu and Okinawa. And I don't have time to tell you all the stories, but I realized then, as you now know now, that we didn't have a pretender in the front row with the other 2 that we knew about. We just had a hero who had never made it to the ship, and so his shipmates didn't know him. And I'm going to make sure that I contact the 2 that were there that wondered whether this other gentleman was pretending, and make sure that they know that they were sitting amongst a brother. So, now I'll do what I really came to do, and that was to honor our veterans by song. And this song is entitled Morning Breaks on Arlington. It was written as a poem by U.S. Senator Orrin Hatch to honor one of his 4 brothers who was killed in World War II and is buried at Arlington. And years later, a friend of his put it to music, and it goes like this. Morning Breaks on Arlington. Morning breaks on Arlington, warmed by rays of golden sun, and all who pause in homage there feel a soft hush in the air. Those who love their liberty bow the head and bend a knee, and from their hearts they breathe a silent prayer. Thank God for those who rest in honor there. The lush green grass at Arlington shimmers in the morning sun, as pure white crosses seem to glow, sentinels in perfect rows. Everyone who lives and breathes wonders at the sight of these who gave to us a gift beyond compare. Thank God for those who rest in honor there. home of the eternal flame, of humble heroes without name, whose graves are guarded day and night, keeping memory burning bright. Those who gave so much for us bravely said, "In God we trust." Now they are safe in His eternal care. Thank God for those who rest in honor there. Our nation's flag now takes the breeze, waving over all of these, and heaven smiles upon each silent one, as morning softly breaks on Arlington.